Everybody's Jason Cruz here once again with the interview, and we are back with Uncle Lukie to give us a perspective on what's been going on in the boxing world. Lukie Ketelle, how you doing?
Thank you for having me back. And I certainly hope you use and abuse me and ask me some hard-hitting questions so I can get myself in trouble.
Okay, so first hard-hitting question. I have seen that you were, I don't know what they call it, admitted, brought in, uh, made whole being a part of the Boxing Writers Association of America or BWA, what BWAAA or BWA. Tell us a little bit about it, and I guess congratulations or I'm sorry. I don't know which
No,
one.
it's cool. I don't know, like when you write about something and you do it, there's always like fear of rejection. I spent all of my teenage years getting rejected by girls, it felt like. So when you sign up for those type of things, I think there's always a huge fear of rejection because it's the highest form of achievement in boxing, and it's the biggest organization out there. And boxing's kind of like a sport that really values history, right? And I think to a point where sometimes it gets obnoxious, but we really honor our history. And because of that, I think there's a lot of protecting the history, and the BWAA serves as a I don't know, like a beacon of historical context for the sport of boxing. So I was always really nervous, but then over the past year, I've been like, you know what? I think I've done a lot in the sport of boxing. So why don't I try? Why don't I try to do it? Because I think that I wouldn't say earned because I don't think you ever earn anything, but I felt I had done enough to be in that group. And it meant a lot to me because I grew up seeing people with that distinction. So it was just something I wanted to do. But I will be honest with you, I was always scared that I was going to get rejected. So I kind of waited, and it felt very good to be a part of that crew.
So what exactly does a member get to do? And it sounds like you have to apply. So tell us about the application process and what are the benefits of being a member as opposed to just being some guy on the internet?
Um, I don't like, I mean, you vote on the Hall of Fame
There you
is
go.
one thing, right? You
Okay.
vote on the award ceremony for it, and it looks really good in a byline. I think the big thing for me is you apply, but it's a group of I'm trying to think of these associations, but it's a group that basically says this is a credible boxing writer. And why it mattered so much to me is we're in an age of information where I write about boxing, but I have a trouble distinguishing, which could be my age, what is credible and what's not credible. So I think for me, the biggest thing, besides all those neat things, is it says, hey, this is a credible person, someone that you can understand is valid and verifiable information. Because I think at this point, there's a lot of misinformation. Um, and that's the biggest thing is this credible organization says this individual is credible and you should listen.
Awesome, awesome. Well deserved. That's great to hear. I'm glad you are a member, and I have a credible person here, at least one of us, on the show today. Let's go straight to it. This Saturday, October 12th, we have a fight. Which you tell me about the rating for Bivol Beterbiev for the light heavyweight title. Tell my MMA listeners a little bit about it and why you should watch it. Which is actually it's going to be during the day, I believe, correct? Because it's in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different contexts to put into place with this because I think that I don't know how fascinating it is for your show or really for any show, but I mean, when Saudi Arabia is involved, at least to me, that is a part of the story. And it always feels like let's just keep it to boxing, but it is like Las Vegas is now becoming a secondary attraction. It's no longer becoming the fight capital. Saudi's kind of taking those fights that used to get Las Vegas. It's an interesting subplot. What is this fight about? Artur Beterbiev, 39-year-old undefeated fighter. Every fight that he's won by knockout. He's one of the most fearsome punchers. He has been dropped. He has been outboxed, but when he lands body shots, they really hurt, and he's able to systematically break people down. He's not exactly like Gennady Golovkin, who I'm sure MMA fans are familiar with, but he's probably the most gifted offensive fighter since Gennady Golovkin that I have seen. And the fact that he's won every single fight by knockout makes him intriguing. Um, I'd compare him in a prediction article. I compared him to the T-1000 in Terminator 2. So I
Oh,
mean, it's like an undestructible force. Then on the other side, you have Beterbiev-Bivol. And by the way, well, I'll say that in the second part. So
okay.
Beterbiev-Bivol has a contrasting style. So he's more of a pure boxer. My comp in terms of pop culture would be for people in their 40s. There was a PC game named called Myst, and my mom bought it for me, and I couldn't figure out how to play it. And that feels like Bivol. You get into a boxing match with him. He takes very talented fighters and makes them feel confused doing things that they've done their whole entire life. He's a master thinker. He's someone that has power, but really what he's great at is being a human Rubik's Cube and nullifying what makes someone great. And he's never really looked that vulnerable in a fight. He beat Canelo Alvarez, he's beat Zordo Ramirez, and the fashion that he's beat fighters, he's actually made it look so dominant, he's been discredited for his wins. So going into this, we have two fighters who are spiritually opposite, who fight in different manners, and they're going for, in my opinion, the greatest light heavyweight ever. I think the winner of this fight, they've spent their whole career at light heavyweight. We have other guys that you could throw in the mix. Roy Jones Jr. I think Roy was better in other weight classes. Andre Ward, I think he's one of the greatest super middleweights. Is he the best light heavyweight? There's an argument, but he really, most of his light heavyweight career, you look at a win over Sullivan Barrera and Sergey Kovalev, who's one of the best guys ever. So you have two champions who I believe, I'm going off the top of my head, have both held a title for 7 years. Beterbiev holds three of the belts. Bivol's defended his one WBA title for 7 years, give or take.
Hmm.
And this is for, in my opinion, who's the greatest light heavyweight ever. So, and I think what adds to that element, and then I'll stop talking, is the fact that you have the classic boxer versus a puncher. And I'm sure you get that in MMA, wrestler versus striker. It always seems like a great matchup when you get an even matchup that has some intrigue about philosophies of fighting. So some people are like, "Oh, the power guy's got to win it. Oh, the boxer's too smart." And I think that heightens to the enthusiasm around this fight.
Now, most casual viewers would know Bivol for beating Canelo Alvarez there. And so my question then is the level of interest in this fight, is this the most important fight of the year? Is it a candidate for it as far as what impact it would have on the division, on a division?
So remember back when you had me on and you told me like the UFC fight cards are starting to feel like college football games that are just on?
Yeah.
So this feels like if you have number one and two in the college football rankings,
Hmm.
but they're not Alabama, they're not Georgia. You might not have seen them for 10 years. Maybe it's Vanderbilt, maybe it's Boston College, but they're really good this year. Maybe it's Washington State. It's kind of like one of those matchups at 2 and 3 who are really good in terms of achievement and sport, but the personalities don't jump out the page. And sadly, in a sport like boxing or I think in MMA, it's personality driven as much as achievement driven. And though these are the most distinguished fighters, and to answer your question, I think it's either this fight or Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury are the most relevant fights this year, 1A, 1B. I think that what hurts this fight is you have two fighters who behave like athletes in other sports. I'm going to show up, I'm going to perform, I'm going to do what we have two athletes that are basically Tim Duncan of the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah.
And boxing has made a whole thing on spectacle. It's made a whole thing on entertainment. If you look at the pageantry, oh, there's a media workout. What are they going to do? What's the intimidation? What's the quote? What's the press conference outfit? And neither of these guys kind of buy into that. So from a sporting landscape, it really is that. But then from a theatrics, I could see a casual MMA observer that tunes into this fight being underwhelmed by the lack of personalities with these two fighters.
Now, I actually was glossing around about this fight, and Eddie Hearn has come out chastising. I think it was Beterbiev for not promoting this fight well enough. Apparently, like at the media scrums, he's literally just giving one word answers and things of that nature. I mean, is it more just the fact that these fighters English is not their native language, or is
Let
it
me
just
get
their
into that
personalities?
because I've actually covered in person both fighters, and I think I can
Okay.
give you a nuanced answer.
Okay.
So for Artur Beterbiev, I covered him for, I believe, his IBF title fight against a German fighter in Fresno, California.
Okay.
He's very sarcastic and he's like an alpha male, and he's probably similar to like a Khabib Nurmagomedov
Yeah.
when he was younger. So he just looks directly into your eyes. He's really big. He's a bulky guy, strong, and he's going to be super sarcastic and he's not going to give you any nuanced answer. So I remember I was like, what would it mean to just kind of giving him generic things to write copy from? What would
Yeah.
it mean to become a champion? I don't know. I can't predict the future. He gives you very sarcastic answers, and his kind of tone is, "What are you going to say if I say that? Like, I'm this friggin' puncher." What I remember was, it's to tell his story better is the nuanced details. So I remember he had a team member who was right behind my head when I interviewed the other fighter, and he stood looking at the guy next to my head. So you know how you feel someone's behind
Right.
you?
Yeah. Mhm.
So the guy's head was right behind my head, making eye contact with the opponent. And I turn around and he doesn't even move. Like he's just like, "What are you doing? Like, keep asking your questions. I just want to look into this guy's eyes." And that's more of what I think's interesting about Beterbiev. I think that like the more you make him talk, the less interesting he is. But then like you watch and it's like he's always lifting weights, he's always training. It would be more fascinating to me if you never had him talk and you just focus on him training, 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 and then you wonder why he does it because he doesn't ever give you those answers. So I think the fact that we've never had content that leaned into that kind of has hurt Beterbiev because he's just not a guy that's going to give you those answers. And I think that's partially cultural. I think that's partially he's got a level of fighter to him, a level of meanness where he's not a reflective guy. He's like, I'm going to beat this guy up and I don't have a deep, witty answer to give you. Like, I don't really want to do this. I'm cutting weight, etc. Bivol, on the other hand, is extremely pleasant. He's, I was in the gym with him probably about 5, 6 years ago now, and he trained for 3.5 hours, and he's funnier than you'd think. He has a good sense of humor, and he's very social. He's very welcoming, you know. So I think the interesting thing is Beterbiev is very standoffish. I don't want to do media. Bivol's very guarded, but if you get him to break his guard, he's kind of a funny guy. And I think that when you see this trailer, you see, oh, he could be an actor, I heard someone say. So I don't think that's a valid criticism because I think you're criticizing someone for just who they are as a person. And I don't think that not all fighters are going to be able to sell fights. Beterbiev is literally a fighter who I don't think can express his emotions all that well.
Interesting thing. And it happened on a Saturday afternoon where no UFC, it doesn't conflict with UFC, so we'll be able to watch it. UFC actually is running a card later that day. But anyway, I want to move to one of Dimitri Bivol's old appointments, and that's Canelo Alvarez. I missed you on the big Mexican Independence Day card. We had huge UFC card at the Sphere, and then Canelo fighting at. I would say, give me your thoughts on it. I thought it was a pretty good card across town at the T-Mobile. What are your thoughts on Canelo's performance, and what's he going to do for Cinco de Mayo weekend?
Look, I thought it was a fine enough card. Like, if you're in boxing for value, you're in the wrong sport. Like, I mean, I don't know how MMA, UFC is run, but like boxing is not a sport where you're like, let me just save like it's use and abuse. It's always like, let's just try to take as much from the liquor store during a hurricane. Like, there's never like, let's look at the consumer. And I think that's also why we don't grow as a sport. There's never an investment in the fan base, it feels like, from promoters outside of, in my opinion, my favorite entity, ProBox TV, which has built a great relationship with fans based around the fact that they put on consistently good fights. So fans are like, oh, if I tune into this, good fight. Um, the sport doesn't grow because you don't see the shoulder programming. You don't see the trust in the product. The NBA and the NFL became what they became because there's a level of trust in the product, right? For this level of card, I think it was a fine enough card. You get the names, you get some matchups. The Caleb Plant Trevor McCumbee fight was good. You get to see Rolly Romero back. He won. Lara versus Danny Garcia. They're both older fighters. I don't know why you would expect a fight any different to turn out when you have two guys either in their 40s or close to their 40s. That's kind of what those fights look like. Um, and then the main event, to me, Berlanga's an underrated fighter because he achieved very well in the sport. People then held him to a high standard. He had 16 straight knockouts to start his career. And then he had to do his developmental fights in main event spots, which is kind of hard because then people go, oh, you had 16 straight knockouts, but you're not good, when he's getting that developmental time that in MMA you don't get to develop. It's just fed to the wolves. It's like, okay, you got 5 fights. You're in the UFC. Okay, you're winning. Let's get you in a real fight. In boxing, there's a level of manipulation where you develop a fighter and then they kind of are put into a position to try to maximize the profit margin. Uh, for me, Canelo at this point seems like he goes to gear two in a 6 gear car, and he doesn't want to be huffing and puffing anymore. So he has a level of comfort. He likes outclassing guys, but it seems like he also doesn't want to get exhausted and he doesn't want to really push himself to that certain extent anymore. And he lets guys hang around with him just because he doesn't want to push his body. I think we're entering into an older era of Canelo. And to be frank, I think there's a level of reluctance with him to face some of the more interesting young challengers, such as David Benavidez and David Morrell, who now are fighting each other in January of next year, it seems,
Mhm.
at light heavyweight. So I think that my main thing with Canelo is he's got to start giving up these belts because the belts allow the young fighters opportunities to create their legacy. He lost one of his belts, the IBF, but I think that the problem a lot of people have is he's picking opponents that we don't deem that interesting, and he's holding the belts hostage, which then that means very talented fighters are just stuck in limbo year after year because they have no clear pathway to a belt.
I thought that the Canelo card was much better than what we saw in UFC, despite the being at the Sphere. I was entertained by the Caleb Plant McCumbee fight, simply for the histrionics. Histrionics, is that right? Just just how well it was. Just like it was like a professional wrestling match. Kind of told a little story there. Also, I think from a casual point of view, you get names that you remember. Danny Garcia, Rolly Romero. You remember them from fights where they took on. I mean, they may have lost or won, but like that you kind of as a casual viewer have seen them on big cards. So I thought that was fine. Terrence Crawford is the name I wanted to bring up because he was crossed down at the UFC fights. The UFC guys thought he was actually Kendrick Lamar, but no, it was Terrence Crawford. He was there. Is that something that Canelo would look toward, or is it too late for anything of substance for that particular fight?
I mean, it's boxing, right? So money plays a role in it. The big issue with that is, and then we have to get into this whole Saudi thing, which bleeds into, I think it's called UFC Noche. I think Crawford was at the PBC card for a little bit and
Oh,
then deliberately left when Canelo was fighting to be at the UFC event, like
oh,
maybe co-feature just to get the TV time to be like, hey, see, I'm really over here with Turkey Al-Sheikh, who, oh my God, what is he? The head of the general sports and entertainment. Is that part of the Saudi PIF? Like they
yeah,
use
it is.
all,
He's the guy. He's the head of it, so he has the ear to the prince, I think it is.
it just gets like, see, this is the problem, and it's not even a problem. We just start using words, and I
Yeah,
understand every word, but I somehow don't understand what they mean.
most
It's
of
like
us. Yeah,
do you know what I mean? I'm well,
yeah, no, no.
you And so right, I'm trying to create his title right. And what we're learning about Turkey Al-Sheikh in boxing is he likes making big fights. He likes spending money. He doesn't like being told no. And Canelo basically was like, okay, I will entertain this after my fight. And from what it seems is he didn't like the idea of, wait, I have to wait. You won't just sign for now. So we've seen fighters like Gervonta Davis, Canelo Alvarez, and now Tim Tszyu to a certain degree all go against the grain with Turkey Al-Sheikh. And there's a potential possible rivalry brewing there. You know, I was a little unsettled where you have Turkey Al-Sheikh who's being positioned as the face of boxing, kind of aligning with the UFC and making statements like, "Oh, we're going to take out Canelo's card." Well, that's not working in the best interests of boxing. I don't even think that's working in the best interests of combat sports because I think a lot of people have crossover interests in UFC and boxing, and I think that kind of hurts both fans because I think that what's been healthy is we've gotten away from UFC versus boxing and we're getting closer to, oh, I like this guy. Oh, I like that guy. I think that's healthier for all sports. I might not be a UFC watch every card, but I enjoy it. Right. And I think that what's scary about that Crawford Canelo fight is I'd like to see the matchup. I think it would be a big, amazing fight. But what do grudges look like in this Riyadh season world with guys that don't go along? Do those fights get facilitated? Does money trump all? And that's what I think would be the thing to follow is what's Canelo's relationship with Saudi in 2025? That's going to dictate it because Terrence Crawford is clearly enjoying the perks of fighting on these cards, but Canelo has never done business with these Saudi backed cards. And it seems as though he's kind of fine with what he's doing right.
Is Riyadh season good for boxing?
I don't know. Like what are your thoughts? Because I struggle with this. Some days I say it's good, some days I say it's bad. Um,
It's so for me, as far as like, is Riyadh season good for, if we were to ask that question for UFC, I, obviously it's done well for TKO Group. WWE and UFC are annually going to the Middle East to do these shows and getting paid a lot of money. But you also wonder about, everything else that may be attached to it later on, whether it's political or financial or whatnot. So it is concerning, but and also, there is the term sport washing there that goes along with it, that the Saudis are now getting into all facets of sports, whether it be combat sports or soccer or whatnot. You wonder, especially with NFL rules being that they can now entertain equity ownership from private equity. Well, at what point is this something to be concerned with, or are we just not thinking about, are we thinking too much about it? That's my take on it.
I mean, it's a confusing topic, right? And boxing's kind of always been about the money, and boxing's always been like, hey, how do you not get fired? Because there's not a lot of jobs. So it's like it's kind of a great accomplice for this type of endeavor. But I think the toughest thing about this is the PGA Tour, the golf tour. We both enjoy
Yeah.
golf.
Mhm.
They did a deal with Saudi, and then the Department of Justice was like, actually, we don't like this. So now we have a fractured PGA Tour that was going to basically combine with Live, but now the Department of Justice has intervened and said, yeah, we're not going to allow that. And now golf is more separate than ever based on that ruling. So for me, I think Saudi's involvement in sports is inevitable. I don't think we can stop it. But then what I don't like is as they get more comfortable, I shouldn't say they, but as Saudi gets more comfortable, the censorship of the media, the hey, stick to the good things we're doing. Don't love that, right?
Yeah.
Like if you enter in, like with my work, right? When I write, I will always take valid criticism because that's part of being in a public space. I'm not loving this. Look at us saving boxing and don't look at any of these things that really do deserve to be brought up. then I think as the fights get more high profile, there's going to be more pushback. And then how does that reflect on our sport? That's my thing, because we're entering into a geopolitical landscape in a sport in boxing that doesn't have the greatest geopolitical capital to begin with. So how ridiculous could boxing look if we're not careful in accurately depicting what these situations are? So I think that for the current moment, it's absolutely fantastic. They're making great matchups, but we have to be careful because what is Saudi's gain from this, right? I'm not naive enough to think, hey, man, they're just big fight fans. They won't put these fights together. There is a level of leverage involved with this and tennis and all that. And I'm not sure because there's days I think, hey, this is good. Everybody involved with boxing is a little screwy. And then there's times where you have representatives of these organizations alienating fighters. And then that's even worse, right? So I don't know how to answer that question because it's too vague right now. I can't I Boxing is in such a bad place, in my opinion, that Saudi Arabia practically runs boxing outside of premier boxing champions. We don't have many networks involved. We have ESPN, we have DAZN, and we have Amazon Prime, but Amazon Prime has never shown a huge backing into boxing. They've just done pay-per-view cards, and October 19th they're going to have another card. Um I'm a little uncomfortable with the state because what happens if Saudi just goes, we're bored. We like soccer, football now better. Our sport kind of goes down the drain because we're so reliant on these cards now. And I feel like promoters now are going, oh man, we don't have to put up the capital. So I honestly think boxing's in a bad place right now. But is that solely because of Saudi? No, I think that's because of years and years and years of not making the best fights.
Yeah, I agree, and it's hard as a casual viewer to deny that Riyadh Season is doing well in making these fights for fight fans and garnering that credibility with the fan base. So I mean, it's something to look at as we move on in 2025. But I also wanted to ask about another promoter making inroads into boxing, and that's Dana White. He's made a lot of inferences, and it could be in association with Riyadh Season. He's been very coy about what the partnerships will be moving forward. But what do you think about Dana White entering into the promotional landscape of boxing?
I mean, I think that he's done a good job of making himself the star of his show. And boxing has a lot of fighters. Like if Dana White was involved with Beterbiev-Bivol, this fight would be infinitely more interesting because he has an amazing talent at taking talented, irrelevant people and sitting in front of a camera and go, okay, listen up, fight fans. You got the best knockout guy ever taking on this guy's. And he just speaks to a certain man or woman in America or across the world and gets them excited. So I'm excited about the potential of him being in a conference room or being on a private jet and just talking to his cell phone and getting fight fans. That being said, I've read stories you've written, I've read stories about other people. It's not just all giving with Dana. It's not just, hey, this is charity. I'm curious to see what those contracts, I'm curious to see all the legal elements of a Dana White deal with fighters, the likeness, the representation, the trademarkings. Can you sell t-shirts? That's the other thing I'd be watching for with Dana White's involvement is how much of the fighter they are a freelance contractor, but then contracted to do certain things like have certain uniform. Not what is it? It's not a uniform, it's a kit, right?
Athletic, athletic wear. I don't. Yeah, I don't specifically know what they call it, but athletic performance wear, maybe.
Yeah, so it's like there's these vague terms. I'm interested to see boxing's anarchy in that regard. I'm curious to see if any of that enters in, and then if other promoters start doing that. So I think that from a fan standpoint, it could make boxing more relevant. From a business and nerd standpoint, maybe it changes the way contracts are dealt with for fighters if they enter in a certain way. I think that maybe equitable partnerships wouldn't be as common if he has success, possibly.
What do you think he's doing? I'm not sure how much you follow Callum Walsh, but Dana is promoting at least Walsh, and they just did one in Dublin, Ireland. I actually was in Dublin in August. It was kind of cool. But they promoted Callum Walsh with a fight card in Dublin, and it was on UFC Fight Pass, another streaming property that we have to subscribe to if he starts to promote more boxing matches on it. Do you think he's doing well with his Walsh's career at least?
Well, are you aware of Callum Walsh?
Not until Dana started
I mean,
promoting.
then he's doing a good job, right? Because he's like Callum's like a talented fighter, amateur background, but he's largely irrelevant. And Dana White has done these videos where he's just kind of screaming at a camera. And now I feel like more UFC fans are aware of Callum Walsh than boxing fans. And that's an untapped marketplace. So I think for me, I think Dana's an amazing promoter because he knows who he speaks to and he's very unapologetic in speaking to that audience. And I think there's a talent in knowing your audience and going all in. And with Callum Walsh, there's something there. The big thing with promoting right is there's got to be a huge talent component. So there is talent with Callum, but the way he's selling them is this is a long reigning title champion. At least that's what I'm hearing is this is the guy, this is the next guy, this is Steve Collins, this is a title holder. And I think there's also a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This could be the next McGregor. Like I think that they're going into that like, hey, you watched him when you were 20. Now when you're 30, watch this guy. He's the boxing McGregor. The party's still going. And that's where boxing gets weird, right? Is at a certain and UFC too. You can promote these guys, you can put a cowboy hat on them, you could bring the flag out, but you got to have that talent component at a certain point. And that's where the fight game gets weird is you can market, 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 but then you got to take some real fights. And then we as the fan decide, did the marketing live up to what you are on? Because we don't judge you for your best night often. We judge you for how you look on your worst night. If you think about all the legends.
So, how does Dana get enough talent to sign? Because it seems like most of the talent, the really good fighters are already spoken for, so to say, with whatever promotional manager, whatever who are they with. How does Dana find these people? Is he doing act? Do you think he actively scouts? Did he just poach some guys? What does he do?
There'll be partnerships. There'll be partnerships because look, there's not that many fight dates that exist right now in boxing. UFC, like I believe it's UFC PFL right now. There's not a lot of MMA dates. Like you got two big promotions and two networks. And outside of that, it's like you're fighting regionally and whatever. In boxing, you've got ESPN cards. There's not a lot of them to finish the year. You got some DAZN cards. They're going to fill up quick, especially if you're not signed to the fighters, unless you want to take a real fight. You got some MVP Jake Paul cards, prospects, but you got to take real fights. There's not a lot of fights, so there's always going to be a promoter that doesn't have enough dates that is looking for someone that can leverage them into that position. So I don't think for someone of his stature that can get network time and TV dates, there's never going to be an issue finding fighters because there's always going to be someone who's willing to broker deals or to help with the boxing side of things to find fights because they're looking to keep their fighters active.
Interesting stuff. Okay, well, we have to go, but I wanted to ask one more thing. Uh, I was about to say Logan, Jake Paul, Mike Tyson is the what I forgot. Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon have a little thing called Something or Nothing on PTI. Jake Paul, Mike Tyson, is it something or nothing?
It's something. I mean, I went to Scotland, I went to Italy, privileged guy, right? And everywhere I go, they'll ask me about boxing if I bring it up. And this is the only fight people bring up. They don't bring up Bivol Beterbiev. They don't bring up Usyk Fury. Across the world, everyone always asks me the same question. Hey, I know this sounds silly, but is Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson a real fight? So there's a level of intrigue to what this fight looks like that's going to garner a lot of attention. I have a feeling that people are going to, after the fact, say, ah, we knew it was, because I think that people are overlooking Tyson's a 60-year-old man. But I think that Tyson is symbolically, I almost said symbolically a symbol. He's a symbol of strength, right? So people wear Mike Tyson shirts and it's like, I'm strong, I'm tough. Mike Tyson, it's like a symbol of toughness. And I think that a lot of people want to believe he can beat Jake Paul. They don't care. They don't look at it like, okay, this is a 60-year-old man. It's like Mike Tyson is the guy from Punch Out. He's a superhero. Yes, he's had ups and downs, but he is one of those guys that we want to believe can beat Jake Paul. I don't know how the fight goes, but I think it's hard to believe a guy who's almost 60 who had a medical condition can beat a 27-year-old person just based on bodies. But I think it's more than likely going to be the most relevant boxing fight to end the year, just based on the level of casual interest and the intrigue for so many different types of people that have a relationship with either one. Young people like Jake Paul, older people like Mike Tyson. It's going to get a lot of attention.
Is Jake Paul just kind of put himself into a corner because if he beats a 60-year-old man, he, expected to beat a 60-year-old man with medical conditions. If he loses, he lost to a 60-year-old man. So yeah, what is he? What's his prospects?
I mean, Jake's pretty incredible at what he does. He's going to make a lot of money. He's going to be and I think for Jake, it's always about the money and keeping the conversation going. And I don't think he backed himself into a corner because if he loses, he's going to hype up Mike Tyson and say, this is one of the greatest fighters ever. And even though he's 60, there's guys my age that wouldn't fight Mike Tyson. And if he wins, he's going to say, I just beat Mike Tyson, who's whatever. He's very good at winning arguments even when he should lose. Like he lost to Tommy Fury and somehow turned that into redemption. So I don't think you can. Jake Paul is a child of the internet and he's learned how to win these debates. So I don't think there's any losing for Jake Paul. I think he figures out things where he's going to get huge financial gain and that even if he were to lose the fight, his name will be even more relevant. And that's kind of his currency. He takes these relevancies on social media and then takes that into whatever he does, brand deals or appearances. And it's like he never stops expanding and growing. So for me, if he loses, what does he do? He probably does a partnership with Netflix because he gave him such a big thing. And then he does some show from there. And then he probably does something controversial and leverages that into that. But guys like Jake Paul are very, very smart and he knows how to use these algorithms really well. And I think he's figured out that kind of negativity fuels social media. So he always figures out a way to be hateable because I think it engages those interactions and engagements. And he's truly a genius when it comes to social media managing. I've never seen someone in the public sphere of a sport master what he does. He's more relevant than our networks in boxing, and he does it based off of just calculated moves.
Does he make an actual run at being a legitimate boxer in 2025? Does he actually not just these huge tentpole celebrity boxing type events, but does he actually try to fight guys in rankings in 2025 and beyond?
He will win a world title.
What?
It'll be a hand selected opponent that he'll have every advantage over.
Like a Roy Jones Jr. kind of winning the heavyweight title from Ruiz?
Well, I mean, yeah, but Ruiz is more of a real guy. I'm thinking of like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. type deal.
Yeah.
Um, and because there's so much money to be made, one of these sanctioning bodies is going to make a belt vacant. Like one of these belts is going to become vacant, and then he'll do whatever he wants. Maybe they'll mandate a defense, but I feel like with very profitable fighters, Canelo's number one mandatory was David Benavidez, and yet he doesn't fight David Benavidez, and yet he doesn't lose his belt. Um, I think that Jake Paul will eventually fight someone who was like a middleweight or a welterweight that moves up to the cruiserweight division, fights a cruiserweight fight, and magically gets ranked in the top 15 of the rankings, and then gets to fight him for a vacant belt. And then he wins a title. And then I think that there's going to be even more interest because then he'll strategically pick fights, and the same thing will happen. These guys will get ranked in the sanctioning body somehow because they'll take one fight. And then people will call for like a real guy like Jay Apataya or one of these guys to fight him. And he may or may not, who knows at that time, but I think he'll win a world title in the next year or two if he stays interested in boxing because he's one of the biggest he brings in the most money. So at a certain point, one of these sanctioning bodies is going to be like, we need to get a bit of this money from this check. And I think he'll win a vacant belt.
This is a great way to kind of end it on a cliffhanger because I am now you've got me wanting to watch in November this fight to remind me myself how Jake Paul looks as a boxer and see if this guy could actually win a world title. I mean, I know there's alphabet soup boxing federations, but
You got to
still,
remember, it's not like a true sport. So, like, if a belt
neither
becomes
is the
vacant,
UFC.
like, at least the UFC, like, you have to fight some top guys because it's a dictatorship. And there's
Yeah,
like a level of like, you have to fight a real guy.
yeah.
In boxing, if you make enough money, a belt can magically become vacant. And then there's a level of tomfoolery that can float up, you know. Guys can fight someone where you're like, wait, why is this guy fighting for a vacant title against this guy? You know, again, not that this is the same example, but Danny Dignam wasn't an amazing middleweight, but he somehow was in position to fight Janabek, who's one of the best middleweights.
Hmm.
It makes no sense why that was a vacant title fight. And I don't think anyone at the time was like, man, this guy, Danny Dignam.
Oh, hold on a sec.
There's been multiple examples of great fighters fighting vacant belts against guys who probably were not deserving, but somehow are ranked number two in the division. I think because Jake Paul has created such an attachment to fans where they don't like him and he's so sensational and he says all this stuff, people are overlooking the way the business of boxing is being run. And Jake is a great businessman and he's taken notes on all this. And don't be shocked if there's a vacant belt on the line and he's fighting a welterweight who moved up to cruiserweight, who's in their 40s, who Jake has all the physical advantages of over, but the fans are like, this guy's a real fighter. And he does a million pay-per-view buys because it's positioned as a real boxing guy who's in his 40s against this kid imposing himself in boxing. But I think that's a bold proclamation that I truly believe is Jake Paul's going to be a world champion. He's going to win a vacant belt against a hand-selected opponent, and people are going to be shocked that it happens.
Interesting. Well, Uncle Lukie, thank you so much for your time. Tell us a little bit about where we could find your stuff.
You can just follow me on Twitter, Lukie Boxing. I write at boxingscene.com. I write for Pro Box TV as part of their news department. I have a newsletter. So if you like Substack, you can jump on the newsletter. You can hear me write and talk and misspell things. And I have a YouTube channel. So basically, if you just type in my name, you can kind of find a whole world of stuff. I'm not the best at like making a one-stop shop, so it's super easy for you. I think it's like if you're ever into conspiracy theories like JFK or something, I guess conspiracy theories kind of lead to a different thing. Let's say urban legends. So let's say like you're into the poltergeist curse if it's Halloween or JFK. If you've done some research on that stuff, maybe treat me as the same thing and you can go to YouTube and find me talking and hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I don't get in enough trouble from this and really appreciate you valuing bringing me on and I hope that this was worthwhile for your listeners.
I hope so. I hope the all of the six people that will tune in will enjoy it.
Well,
But
I appreciate them.
thank you so much. Have a great day.